See people trickling in and then we're going up. That's what I love to see. We have a couple more, a decent amount of participants left. We are probably going to wait another 3 or 4 minutes to get started. And then we'll get the webinar going. So thanks for your patience. See, we've got another handful of attendees coming in. Just a reminder that we'll start in around 2 minutes. Get the webinar going. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started then. Thank you for being here. My name is Ben Negron. I want to welcome you all to the webinar series for the Autism Intervention Research Network on Physical Health, or AARP. Thank you for joining us. Because of the number of participants, your audio is going to be muted throughout the call, but you can submit questions at any point during the presentation via the Q&A feature, or you can just type questions in the chat box as well at any time during the presentation. This entire webinar is being recorded. It will be available on the AARP website, which I'll post in the chat in a moment. And there'll also be a short evaluation survey at the end of it. So we invite you to provide feedback on this webinar and to provide suggestions for topics, or even speakers for future webinars. So in the interest of time, let's get started. First, I want to acknowledge the Health Resources and Services Administration as the funding source for the AARP. This project is supported by the Health Resources and Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services under the Autism Intervention Research Network for Physical Health Grant. The information, content, and/or conclusions are those of the authors, and that should not be construed as the official position or policy of nor should any endorsements be inferred by HRSA, HHS, or the US government. So with that out of the way, I'm excited to start the webinar today. Maria, you take it away.
Thank you, and welcome everybody to the webinar. We are going to be talking about the research basics training, working towards inclusive autism research. Next. So here's our agenda for today. First, we're going to do very quick introductions. I will say a few words about our team and how we came up with the idea for this training. And Reid will give us more of the rationale and the philosophy of why this training is important. And we'll talk a bit about the training and the process of translation to make the training accessible. Morgan will give us more the meat of the training because they are the person who piloted the training, who delivered it in the community. We're going to switch back to Reid, who will talk about an experiment we did after the training, inviting the participants to focus groups, focusing on issues of autism, gender, and sexuality and well-being, and contributed their ideas to policy recommendations. And then we'll have a few minutes for questions and answers. Next. So this is who we are, Reid, Morgan, and Maria, and we have been working together for about 4 years, I would say, and very closely with the rest of the team. Next. And when I say we work together and with the rest of the team, I should add that we work together as the gender, sexuality, and reproductive health node of AARP. So that's where we collaborate. So our team consists of, in the node, consists of 9 autistic partners and 4 non-autistic partners. And as I said, we have been working together for about 4 years. And we have 2 working meetings a year. And in one of those, the notion of community engagement came up. And one of the issues that we discussed is that, yes, we all want to engage people in our research projects. However, often people are not in the community. Autistic people, people with intellectual disability, sometimes are not trained and don't have some of the basic skills needed for research and for participation in research, and therefore they're left out. So the idea came up of, well, let's start to think about what we can do about it. And we came up with a collaborative project. So our philosophy is based largely on community-based participatory research. And I figured that just to make sure that we're all on the same page, I would share this definition. So then we'll move on. You will see how we applied the principles. Community-based participatory research is a collaborative research approach that is designed to ensure and establish structures for participation by communities affected by the issue being studied, representatives of organizations and researchers in all aspects of the research process, to improve health and well-being through taking action, including social change. As you can see, this is an early definition. CBPR has been around for about since the early 2000s. Next. So here are the key elements of community engagement. Equitable. So it is equitable because partners are involved in all aspects of the research, from the original idea for the research. And that original idea is a topic that is of importance to the community. Ultimately, CBPR combines knowledge and action for social change to improve community health and eliminate health disparities. So CBPR is not a method. It's a philosophy, it's a position, it's an approach to research in which we're bringing, in the case of autism research, we're bringing the knowledge and the expertise and the lived experience of the autistic community to center stage, and we do research based on their needs and their ideas, and they have ultimately the possibility of changing or making decisions on what research is being done, how research is being done, and how research is being shared with the community. Next. So now we're switching, as I said, and Reed will give us the rationale for our training.
Yep, thanks, Maria. And yeah, so we're starting with why we made this training. So the first reason was that it's really important for autistic people to be more involved in research. And when we say autistic participation, we mean both as participants within research studies as well as researchers or research partners within these studies. By educating autistic people about the importance of research, it makes them want to be involved more and seek out those opportunities. Another reason is that the resources about research are not accessible. So a lot of resources to teach people about research are locked behind academic institutions. And even if people were to be able to get access to those, they're often written in a way that you need a degree to understand. And because for many people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, there are a lot of barriers to higher education, we wanted to make something that was more accessible for community members. We also wanted to make research more relevant to autistic people, because if autistic people don't understand how research impacts their lives, they're less likely to want to participate in whatever form works for them. We also want to see less potential for harm from autistic research. So for example, historically, a lot of autism research has focused on interventions to make autistic people seem less autistic or trying to cure autism. And we know that's something that the autistic community does not want. And so by consulting with the autistic community before going into research and making sure that autistic people are involved every step of the way, those harms are less likely to happen. And then lastly, a popular phrase within the disability rights community is nothing about us without us. And that just means that people with disabilities should be involved in any space where decisions about us are being made. And so in research spaces, there are lots of decisions being made about autistic people, and we aren't always involved. So we hope that this training is one step that can help change that. Next slide, please. And so going through the parts of the training, this was all decided with the rest of the GSR node, and we came up with these subjects and wrote out the content together. So we decided the 3 modules should be: what is research, how is research done the right way, or research ethics, and then being a community research partner. And so each module is laid out in a similar way for accessibility. It starts with outlining the goals for the module and setting group norms. And then we define the key terms and concepts that people will see throughout that module. And then once we get through the content, we do individual or group exercises to sort of put everything into practice. Next slide, please. And so in terms of what the materials look like, and all these materials are available for free, and we'll give out our website later because we really want to encourage everyone to use these. So we have a participant manual and an instructor manual. And so the participant manual has a little introduction to what our training is. It has the worksheets that they would be working from throughout the modules, as well as the glossary with key terms from each module. And then the instructor also gets a manual, and within the instructor manual is a basic script for each of the modules. So it would be easy for someone with a little experience in this to be able to pick it up and be able to teach someone else. Next slide, please. And so these next few slides are slides taken directly from our training. So I'm just going to read through them. And so this first slide is a communication guide, which is just part of our group norms to help make the space more accessible. So it says, communicate in whatever way works best for you, with or without webcam, voice, chat, through a support person, etc. Ask questions if something doesn't make sense. Leave space for everyone to get a chance to talk, and try and stay on topic because we don't have a lot of time. Next slide, please. And then this is the introduction to our first module, what is research? And so we tried to do this mix of text and graphic. So we define research as a planned way of finding and collecting information, using that information to answer questions or solve problems, and sharing what we learned with others. Next slide, please. This next one is from module 2 about research ethics. So this slide just outlines some of the rules of research ethics. So we say the number 1 rule is do no harm. There are rules around when and how to contact participants, rules about how data gets used, and more. And then the instructor goes into more detail, and participants have space within their workbooks to be able to take notes. Next slide, please. And here's where we define community research partner, like we defined CVPR earlier. This is how we tried to define it for this training. We say participatory research is research that works with partners in the community to come up with what to research and how to research it. And autistic people can work as community research partners. Community partners can be advisors on a project or do the same kinds of work as other researchers. Next slide, please. And so this graphic we use throughout all of the modules to show the 5 steps of research: finding a study topic, designing the study, collecting data, analyzing data, and sharing results. And so this particular version of the graphic is to show autistic people that there are ways for them to get involved in every step as a community research partner. And then we go into more detail as to how within each step. Next slide, please. And then after we wrote out all of this content, I went through and did the translation into plain language. So plain language means writing that is more accessible for a large variety of people, but was generally made with the idea of making better access for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So plain language is written between a 6th and 8th grade reading level with shorter words and sentences. It also adds definitions to all terms that were necessary for understanding. And then we added some extra visuals and example scenarios as well as worksheets, so that, again, people had like a more concrete way of practicing the skills that they were learning during the training. And yeah, if you want to see more information about writing in plain language, this is a really great way of making things more cognitively accessible. Again, not just for people with IDD, but anyone who might be learning English, older adults who might have more trouble with reading comprehension. So yeah, I encourage you to look into that if you get the chance. Next slide, please. Yeah, and now I think we're going to Morgan to talk about piloting the training.
Thank you, Reed. All right, next slide, please. All right, so first we'll talk about how we organize the training. So a disability service organization in Northern California recruited participants from among their service users. So we didn't directly recruit the participants themselves. The organization did that for us. And we ended up with 12 autistic service users who participated in our pilot. And this disability service organization was very helpful to us in a lot of ways. That the staff were also consulted during the course development, and they also acted as supporters along with other non-autistic members of the research team. And we'll get into the role of supporters during the trainings in just a little bit. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about organizing the trainings. So as was mentioned earlier, I was the person who taught the trainings as an autistic educator. The trainings were taught in 2-hour classes on 3 consecutive weeks. And so, as we mentioned, there were 3 units to this. And so to give participants a break, there was just 1 unit per week. And all the research team members, training participants, and the agency staff were compensated for their time. We thought that was very important. Next slide, please. So as Reed was saying, accommodations are very important to us, and here's some more information about how we work to try to make these trainings accessible. So I mentioned that we recruited, or that the Disability Service Organization recruited 12 autistic service users for our pilot. And we divided them based on their need for support persons present. One group was smaller and had more staff per participants, and this allowed them to have more individual support. And then there's another group that had fewer staff per participants, and this was just to try to accommodate different types of access needs that people had. And then at the same time, we also had another participant who preferred to have individual classes. And so we hosted separate trainings for that person. We also sent out text and email reminders to participants before each class. And each week, participants received the slides for that week's unit, as well as the notes for the previous week's unit to help them review what they had learned and to give them like a heads up for what content would be coming the next week. All right, next slide, please. So next I'll talk a bit about course exercises. So as I mentioned, we had 2 groups, well actually 3, because we had also like one person who did it as an individual. And so because of that, they were taught a little bit differently. And so I think if you're teaching this to yourself, this might be something to think about based on the support needs of the folks that you're working with. So the larger group are the people who needed a little bit less support from support persons anyway. It doesn't mean that they didn't need more support overall in other ways, but because there were more people, we ended up breaking up into breakout groups on Zoom with 1 support person per breakout group. And in this case, the role of the support person was sort of just helping to facilitate the discussion. And then for the smaller group and the individual, these exercises were just done together. And so in that case, I facilitated rather than having another support person facilitate. And the purpose of the exercises was to give the participants a chance to practice what they learned during the units. Next slide, please. All right, next we'll give some examples of some of the course exercises. Next slide, please. All right, so here is one that is called pair exercise, steps of a study. As we mentioned before, depending on the size of your group, you might have more than 2 people working together. It kind of depends on, or you might have 1 person working by themselves. So, and that this can vary depending on who your population is. So the prompt was to work with a partner to go through the steps of a study worksheet. And then the questions are, what question do you want to research? And so the participants would be encouraged to think about what they might be potentially interested in around research. And in this case, we were encouraging them to think about issues relating to autistic people. And so, for instance, like how healthcare for autistic people, or jobs or employment, school and housing for autistic people, for example. And then next, we asked them to think about what type of data they would want for their study. Then we asked them to think about how they would collect data for their study. And then we asked them to think about, after they had collected and analyzed the data, what were some ways that they would want to share their results. All right, next slide, please. All right, and then what's up on the screen now? I think Reed had mentioned that we had some worksheets. Right on the screen at this point is a worksheet that goes over steps of a study, which I will read off. Step 1 is find a study topic, and then that says, what topic do you want to research? And the topic ideas are things like healthcare, jobs, school, housing, or anything else. And then there's a place for them to write down what their study topic is. And then there's a prompt. Let's narrow down your topic to a more specific research question. And then there's a space for them to write their research question. And then there's a question that says, why are you studying this? And then a space for them to write down their answer. And then step 2, design study. Who will participate in your study? And then a place for them to write their answer. What do you hope to find out from them? What questions would you ask? Try and think of at least 2 questions, and then a place to write their answers. Step 3, collect data. What methods will you use to collect data for your study? Circle or highlight the ones that you would use. And then we have some example types of data that they could use, such as surveys, interviews, focus groups, medical records, government reports, reading other research, and other ideas. All right, next slide, please. And then this is the second page of the worksheet. It starts off with the question, why do you think those are the best methods for you to use? And then a space for them to write their answer. Step 4, analyze data. What kind of data do you think would help answer your research question? Circle or highlight your choice. And then their options are numbers/statistics, talking with people, and both. And then why do you think that? And a space for them to write their answer. And then another question, what are some questions you hope your data could help you answer? It is okay to come up with imaginary ideas since we don't have real data for this exercise, and then a space for their answer. And then step 5, share results. How would you spread the word about the results of your study? Circle or highlight the ones that you would use. And then their options are research journals, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, writing a paper, my own website, working with my community, giving a presentation, and other ideas. And a space for other ideas that they might have. All right, next slide, please. All right, and then here is another exercise from the Research Basics training. This one is called Ethical or Not. We talked about teaching people about research ethics. And so this is an exercise where they get to practice what they learned about that. And then the prompt is to work with the partner to go through the ethical or not worksheet. And again, they may or may not have a partner, or they might be in a larger group, or they might be working alone, depending on their circumstance. All right, next slide, please. And then again, we have a worksheet from the training, Research Basics Training Session 2 worksheet, ethical or not. For each of the examples below, decide if they are an example of ethical or unethical research by circling or highlighting your choice. Then write a sentence or 2 explaining why you feel that way. Bonus, if an example is unethical, what could get changed to make it more ethical? And then the scenario is number 1, Jacinta wants to participate in a study. She has some trouble understanding the consent form. She asks the researcher who wrote it for help understanding it. The researcher gets annoyed by Jacinta's questions and tells her she can't participate in the study. And then the question is, this research is ethical or unethical, and why? And then scenario number 2, Cora is participating in a study. She tells one of the researchers that she's worried about how her personal information will be protected. The researcher explains to Cora in plain language about how her information is protected. This research is ethical or unethical, and why? Scenario number 3, Dev is participating in a study. He felt like one of the questions the researcher asked him was rude. He calls another researcher to tell them what happened, but that researcher doesn't take him seriously. This research is ethical or unethical, and why? Next slide, please. All right, this is page 2 of the same worksheet. Scenario number 4, Ronald is a researcher. He collects blood from a participant for a study. Then he uses the blood to do experiments to answer a different research question. The participants did not agree to getting their blood taken for that reason. This research is ethical or unethical, and why? Scenario number 5, Maria is participating in a study about relationships and dating. Maria thinks one of the questions in the study is embarrassing. She does not want to answer this question. She asks the researcher if she can skip it, and the researcher says that is okay. This research is ethical or unethical, and why? And then scenario number 6, Sydney is researching the flu. She gives a bunch of research participants flu tests at the hospital, but she leaves papers with the test results out in the open in the hospital. There is a chance that other people working there saw the names and test results of the participants. This research is ethical or unethical, and why? All right, next slide, please. All right, so now we have another example of a exercise that participants get to practice. And this is called the finger process. And the purpose of this is to help participants practice one method of coming to a group consensus that might be done in a research study group. And so the hypothetical scenario here is, where should we go for lunch? And the proposed solution is, let's go to a pizza place. And so then the participants would kind of get to say, they get to practice how they would respond using the finger process. And if you're not familiar with the finger process, how it goes is, in this situation, 1 might mean that you were really excited about pizza. You might even have some ideas of which pizza place to go to. If you answered a 2, that might mean that you were pretty happy about it. Maybe not as happy as a 1. You might not have particular ideas of which pizza place to go to, but you're quite excited about it. Number 3 might mean that you wanted to discuss it some more. Maybe you weren't sure if you wanted pizza or something else, and you wanted to talk about it some more as a group. Number 4 would mean that you really weren't into the idea of going to a pizza place for lunch, but you weren't going to block it if other people did want to go. And number 5 might mean that you really hated the idea of going to a pizza place for lunch and that you would block it for the rest of the group. And so this is just an idea, an example for participants to practice how they might come to a group consensus. And it's called the finger process because traditionally it's done by holding up fingers, but some participants might find that process infantilizing. And so that's why we encourage them to just say a number aloud if that works better for them, or to write a number in the chat. There's lots of different ways of doing that, of course. And then there's a picture of a pizza on the slide here. All right, next slide, please. All right, Reed, it's yours.
Thanks, Morgan. And so we'll finish out with how we use the knowledge from the trainings in our focus groups on sexuality. Next slide, please. So after the training happened, participants were invited to focus groups. And for these, we already predefined the topic. And because our particular node is interested in gender and sexuality with autistic people. So the questions that we gave participants in the focus groups were, what research do you think should be done about autism and gender identity and sexuality? And how should this kind of research get done? For example, who, where, and when. Next slide, please. So this is part of our invitations for the focus group, how we tried to frame this exercise. Sometimes people with disabilities get left out of conversations about gender and sexuality. That makes our lives harder. It makes it more likely for us to have health problems. People who study gender, sexuality, and health need to listen to us. So the participants that were trained in the research basics training didn't necessarily have like a specific interest in gender and sexuality. But when we sent out this invitation and we did a bridge session, which gave people some basic information about gender and sexuality presented like in an easier to understand way, all of the training participants did want to be in the focus group. So I think that shows a lot that if you really work to show that the research is relevant to people, that they will want to participate. Next slide, please. So these focus groups took place virtually over Zoom, and just like the training, supporters were there for people who needed that support during the groups. And so again, this was like really made to sort of generate questions and ideas. And so I'm going to just read a few of the questions that our participants came up with on our Jamboard. Can autistic people date and marry non-autistic people? How do autistic people balance relationships and work? How does autism affect how people trust others? How does age of diagnosis affect how people feel about being autistic or getting diagnosed? And how do autistic people first experience their sexuality compared to other people? And how does sex ed line up or not line up with how autistic people experience sexuality? Next slide, please. So we took all of these ideas and incorporated them into this paper that we wrote, that members of the node and other members of AIRP wrote collaboratively. That has recommendations for education, clinical practice, research, and policy on promoting well-being in autistic youth and adults through a positive focus on sexuality and gender diversity. And so these ideas that the participants who we had trained on those research basics were incorporated into this report. And yeah, we really wanted to show that there are definitely like barriers to people getting involved, but I think it's also can be easier than people think, that there are interested people out there and it's just about connecting with them. Next slide, please. And so if you have any other questions, you can ask now, and also check out our training, which I think we'll also in the chat. And you can also scan this QR code with your phone, and that will link directly to the training as well. But I think that's our last slide.
Yes, and we're happy to answer. Thank you, Reed and Morgan. And we're happy to answer any questions you may have. And I want to reiterate what Reed said and Morgan also said before. This we created it, our team created it, but the idea is to be used in the community and to be, to some extent, changed if and adapted to your needs. This is, Morgan gave us great examples of how we adapted the delivery of the course and ensured that participants got what they had signed up for. And so, you know, the course can also be adapted. We didn't want to go, we wanted the opportunity to have a conversation with you in the audience in case you had questions. And therefore, we didn't go into, day by day in the 3 units of what we were teaching, what we're hoping to teach. But I think that you can take a quick look. Each unit is a relatively short group of slides, and the manuals are there to spell it all out. So
I wanted to answer the question in the chat about incorporating non-speaking individuals. So the wonderful thing about doing like virtual workshops is that, I think that makes it very easy to use the chat if the chat is accessible to them. I think that would depend on what their preferred method of communication would be, but because so much of the communication that happened with this actually happened through chat or through the Jamboard, I don't know that that was necessarily a barrier for people in this case, unless typing itself was a barrier. I hope that that helps.
I can also add to that. So I don't know if we use them in this iteration of the training, but in other trainings I've given, we tell people to type ... in the chat to indicate that they are typing something. And that means that everyone will stop and give that person the time that they need. And so that's been really helpful in other trainings I've done to facilitate participation of non-speaking people. And yeah, it's the sort of the same thing with if there's someone that uses like a letterboard and needs a support person, making up some kind of signal beforehand that like this person has a response and is ready to answer or is compiling their response can be really useful.
Yes, I want to add to that during our meetings, not everybody speaks during the meeting, but plenty of people, the chat conversations sometimes are much more engaged and lively than are, amongst those of us who are speaking. And so we always have someone in charge of the chat to make sure that those voices are also heard and are part of the conversation. So it's a good way to include people.
I don't do biomedical research, so I'm not sure how to answer this next question that we have about that. Maria, can you speak to that at all?
Do we have thought about how to manage people who live the experiment? Background knowledge needed. I do have, and again, I think that philosophically, we can have people engaged because what questions we're asking and how we're asking the questions and what data we're gathering and how we distribute the information. I think that Reid made a very important case about how people who may not even be aware of how these, our research projects affect them, with some training and with translation and making accessible language, people get interested and their contributions are amazing. So I think that in all aspects of medical research, in all honesty, our teams will benefit, research benefits, our knowledge base and our results benefit from incorporating members of the community. One of the issues that we often have is the lack of translation of research findings, and therefore the community doesn't know what science is finding, and this would be a way to redress that.
Reid, did you want to speak about your comment about Jackie Ryan's course? I can read off the comment.
Yeah, I haven't gotten the chance to like fully review her material, but I have seen it, and from what I understand, it's not in plain language, so it would not be as accessible to autistic people with intellectual disabilities. I know like there's a lot of different projects sort of happening at once to try and create alternatives to things like the city training. And so this is just one version of all of this work that's sort of iterating on each other.
Thank you. And then I'll read the comment. So Emily says, thank you for a great presentation. Can you tell us more about how this training is unique relative to other trainings for community members, e.g. those developed by Jackie Bryan? Thank you.
So yes, I think that Reed addressed that. For what I've seen of the course developed by Jackie, it's much more. I mean, it's much more intensive. It takes longer to deliver it. This is the beauty of this, is that it's fairly condensed, and I think that ultimately the courses could be complementary. They don't compete with one another. They could complement each other. One of the issues that we have struggled, and I bring it up, although there is no question about this, is that in research is that ethics and including research partners from the community and seeing what our IRBs accept or not accept as trainings is still work in progress. I think that Reed has experience on the topic because he's been working on those issues, but this continues to be a barrier for community engagement that hopefully will solve. But that's why our course dedicated an entire unit to ethics and the basics of the IRB. So it would be ideal one day to have that accepted, or something like that accepted by our IRBs.
I had answered a question in text. Someone asked, are there other initiatives for people with disabilities to be included in research projects, particularly not autism related? I didn't know a disability specific one, but I know that there's an initiative called All of Us. That's a research group that's trying to work with people who are traditionally left out of research. So that might be a good place to look.
Yes, I think that community engagement is something that, at least let's get back to the autism research community, has been a little bit slow in adapting. Again, the concepts have been out since 2000. There are some examples of community engagement that have been the pioneers, like Aspire, for instance, a collective in Oregon that has been working together for many, many years. But lately, and that gives me hope, at least, is that many funders, of course, we have PCORI, but are bringing to center stage the autistic voices and experiences and knowledge and research to reconfigure to some extent the research field. And that is very encouraging. So we hope that this training will be a tool that researchers will use when they are thinking about putting together their community partner team to make sure that, if nothing else, brings everybody to the same level, right? Or to a base level to start from building on knowledge.
I see that Lisa, excuse me, I see that Lisa Krohn is at her hand raise.
I'm sorry, Ben, it was very choppy. I couldn't understand your question.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I said that I see that Lisa Krohn has had her hand raised for a bit, so I just want to make sure.
Yeah, please.
Yes, just to echo what Lisa said, I was really impressed by how quick the participants were to come up with research ideas, given that from what we knew, this was their first time, being asked to think about research. And so I think it really just showed that people can do these things when they're given the opportunity. And so I really hope that there are more opportunities for that in the future.
Yeah, that actually makes me think a little of the question about like biomedical research and genetics. Like, I think there are ways to explain that plainly and that people could understand it and will have ideas, but I think it's more about there's a lot of distrust within the community around biomedical research. So explaining that your research is not going to contribute to harms that have been done is going to be a pretty big hurdle in that.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, Reed.
Great. Is there anyone else? Any other questions, comments, thoughts? We still do have some time, so feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A.
If there are no more questions, I once again want to reiterate thank you to my partners, and such a pleasure to be able to come together and continue sharing this with the community. Please go to, use the QR code, go to the link and take a look at the course, and send us comments. The only thing we ask is if you use it and you publish something, give the group credit. But other than that, we hope that you will enjoy using it as much as we did, because it's a really grateful tool, a useful tool.
Amazing. So thank you again, Maria and team. Thank you for all you attendees for this webinar. It has been recorded. It'll be archived on the ARP website, also on the YouTube channel. In the chat, I'm going to paste three things: the webinar archive, the YouTube channel, but also the post-webinar survey. Just did that right now. Please take a few moments to complete the survey. It's very short. It's around a minute, 2 minutes, and provide feedback for future webinars. We want to know what you want to hear about, the types of topics and speakers that you want to hear about and see. The next webinar will take place in a month. The exact date will be September 17th at 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern time. And once again, thank you for attending. Have a great rest of the day.